All right, today we're diving into a really powerful YouTube commentary. It's a critique of that proposed animated Animal Farm adaptation, and it argues that it completely subverts Orwell's point about communism to instead attack a tech billionaire.
And the analysis is so passionate, you can really tell the creator knows their Orwell inside and out.
Absolutely. But to make that argument land with maximum impact, we think it needs a slight shift in its focus. So I think the first big thing is this. To really elevate the critique from, just an ideological disagreement to a truly robust analysis, the commentary needs to spend less time trying to prove dishonest intent.
Right.
And more time demonstrating the structural failure of the adaptation's whole premise. Throughout the piece, we hear these really strong assertions that the adaptation is a purposefully wrong interpretation.
Yeah, or a subversion tactic.
Exactly. And look, that's a compelling hook, but focusing so heavily on the creator's intent is, well, it's always going to be speculative, isn't it?
You can't prove it. And more importantly, it kind of distracts the audience from the real strength of the piece, which is that deep dive into the mechanics of Orwell's satire. I agree. I mean, you don't want to ignore the creator's intent entirely. That would soften the punch.
Sure.
But the argument becomes, exponentially stronger if you show the structural flaw first. What if we looked at it just from a comparative politics angle?
Okay, how so?
The key should be demonstrating why the analogy tech billionaire and crony capitalism, why that just fundamentally fails to fit into the totalitarian framework that Orwell built in Animal Farm.
So focus on the mechanism of the corruption, not just the new target.
Exactly. If the engine of tyranny in the adaptation isn't the same engine Orwell described, then the entire satire just breaks. It doesn't matter what the filmmaker's politics are.
Yes. That lets you use Orwell's own text as the weapon. You can get really specific.
Right.
So, looking at the section on the pigs, tyranny, Napoleon, and Snowball, the commentary could strengthen this point by explaining the core flaw a bit more. Orwell's satire hinges on the failure of enforced equality, which then requires that more equal hierarchy to force people to work.
And that's what leads to the totalitarian government.
Precisely. The argument then needs to articulate very clearly why a critique of, say, a tech billionaire, which is all about markets, merit, wealth accumulation, why that just fundamentally breaks the internal logic of the Animal Farm world.
Because that world is built on the destruction of merit.
The destruction of merit, political purges, state coercion. It's not about someone getting rich in a market system.
That's the crucial distinction. I think we need to spend more time on that. A tech billionaire, when you critique them, you're usually saying they have too much money or they bought a huge house, a fancy sports car.
Right, conspicuous consumption.
But Napoleon's tyranny isn't about that. It's about total political control. It's about forcing constant labor and keeping everyone in perpetual fear and poverty.
It's the difference between being priced out of the housing market and being sent to a gulag for saying the wrong thing.
Exactly. The analogy just doesn't hold up if the power structure isn't identical.
So to make this really actionable, I'd suggest drawing a sharper contrast. Use Orwell's description of how the pigs evolved.
Okay.
Highlight that their power comes from controlling information, rewriting the rules, the purges, forced labor, all things done to prevent a coup. And if the adaptation just suggests the problem is the billionaire pig bought too many luxury goods, then the commentary can state very explicitly that the adaptation has either completely misunderstood or just deliberately gutted Orwell's specific critique of state terror.
So if the mechanism doesn't fit, if the pig doesn't need a free market to become a tyrant, then the adaptation fails on its own term.
Yes.
And the burden of proof then shifts from proving the creators are biased to proving the adaptation is just intellectually bankrupt. That is a much, much stronger argument.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's the structural argument, the intellectual core. But a powerful argument also needs to be delivered smoothly.
Which brings us to the next point.
It does. The overall impact of the argument is diminished by some pretty significant digressions. It suggests that refining the structure could really help keep the focus laser sharp. There's this really passionate defense of current events, specifically Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter and the whole censorship debate.
Right, and you can tell it's deeply felt and connected to the creator's world.
For sure, but it becomes a lengthy tangent. It really pulls the listener away from the main critique of the Animal Farm movie itself.
Yeah, for a new listener, it might start to sound like two different arguments.
Exactly. One's a literary critique, and the other is a defense of free speech and Musk that only, partially overlaps.
So is there a way to keep that really crucial point about modern censorship without derailing the main analysis?
That's the question.
I think we should recommend integrating that whole discussion much more concisely. Frame those real-world events not as a separate topic, but as immediate, tangible proof of why Orwell's original critique is so relevant right now. I mean, that's a perfect rhetorical lever, isn't it?
It is.
It just highlights the deep irony. The very thing Orwell warned about, totalitarian control of information, is playing out on social media today. And yet, the adaptation chooses to ignore this incredibly pressing Orwellian threat and focus on something else entirely.
It makes the choice to critique capitalism feel, as you said, deliberately obtuse. I think we can strengthen the flow here with a few structural edits. First, that section on how Musk saved Western civilization or literally reopened free speech, that needs to be cut down a lot.
Just condense it.
Yeah, condense that whole block into a brief, powerful summary paragraph. It just needs to serve as a direct counterexample to the adaptation's simple rich people bad theme. That alone will improve the pacing so much. Second, it needs a smoother bridge. Instead of this abrupt shift where you feel like you've left Animal Farm behind, you can pivot directly.
Like from the book to the real world?
Exactly. Go from the original text's warning about rewriting the commandments to the modern threat of censorship on social media, and then conclude that this modern threat is the exact danger Orwell warned about. That highlights the irony of the film focusing on, say, wealth instead.
And instead of letting that detailed defense drag the energy down, you could use that really high-impact line, something like, unironically, he stopped the Animal Farm-style communist takeover through his purchase of Twitter.
Oh, that's a great line.
Right? Use that as a punchy, conclusive thesis for that whole segment. It's powerful punctuation. It drives home Orwell's relevance, and then you can get right back to the failed adaptation. That tightening just keeps the audience focused on the betrayal of Orwell's theme.
Precisely. If you can prove the adaptation is missing the most pressing Orwellian threat facing society today, which the speaker clearly thinks is the control of information, you elevate the entire critique. All right, let's move to the final piece of high-level feedback.
Tone and style.
Tone and style. So while the commentary is super effective at engaging its existing audience with its, confrontational, informal style, broadening the linguistic choices would help the message resonate way beyond its immediate niche. It would maximize its cultural impact. The material uses a lot of specific internal slang, right? It addresses the chat directly and uses really colloquial language like cringe shit, glazing him, or dude, that's really good.
Which is authentic to the creator, for sure.
Totally. But for new listeners or people who aren't steeped in that online culture, those words can feel a bit exclusionary.
Right.
And they can potentially undermine the seriousness of the core analysis. The argument about Stalinism is so rigorous. It just deserves a presentation that matches that intellectual weight.
That does raise a critical question, though. Is there a risk that by relying so heavily on that high niche slang, you might inadvertently reduce the speaker's perceived authority?
I think so.
Especially when you're talking about, foundational political theory.
Exactly. We're not saying remove the passion or the edge, that's the unique voice. But we are suggesting structuring the delivery so the intellectual core is presented with maximum clarity. The goal is to keep that visceral reaction, but just polish the persuasive argument around it. I agree completely. That passion needs an authoritative wrapper to help it land with force. So we'd suggest filtering the colloquialism strategically.
Okay.
Maybe substitute the really ephemeral internet slang with more universal, high-impact language, especially when you're summarizing Orwell's work or giving that historical context on the Russian Revolution or Stalinist purges.
When the stakes are that high, the language needs to be sharp.
Authoritative and sharp. And think about the framing that's already in there. The reference to Apocalypse Now successfully adapting Heart of Darkness. That's a great model.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
It's a moment where the commentary achieves this really clear, polished, authoritative voice. Our advice would be to make sure the whole literary analysis section maintains that same level of presentation.
And finally, just a word on rhetoric. Strategic use of hyperbole is key here. I'd advise the listener to reserve that high-impact, passionate rhetoric like saying, "We live in the worst timeline imaginable," for the conclusion or for major transition points.
To shock the listener back to attention.
Exact. If you let the factual analysis of Orwell's themes, the greed, the lust for power, the rewriting of rules, if you let that stand on its own without needing constant informal reinforcement, it'll increase the persuasive gravity of the message tenfold.
Precisely. Okay, let's bring this critique to a close. This material is sharp, it's passionate, and it's so deeply rooted in the source material. The biggest opportunities for growth are really about maximizing that persuasiveness and reach.
We focused on 3 main areas. First, shifting the core of the critique to the structural and mechanical failure of the adaptation's political analysis.
Instead of just focusing on intent.
Right, the mechanism of tyranny has to match. Second, streamlining that discussion on contemporary politics, like the Twitter stuff, so it serves as a powerful, illustrative point, not a long digression.
And third, just refining the tone and style to make sure the message resonates as broadly as possible, maximizing its cultural impact while still keeping the speaker's authentic, high-energy voice.
So the key actionable steps are pretty clear. Spend more time explaining why a critique of tech and capitalism just fundamentally breaks Orwell's specific totalitarian analogy. And then, tighten the flow by integrating the current event stuff as concise, high-impact examples.
We are genuinely excited by the direction of this commentary. We really encourage you to implement these suggestions and submit the refined material back to us for a follow-up. We know this piece has the potential to be a powerful, persuasive counter-argument, and we look forward to seeing it strengthened.